right? So we usually have a test environment, a development environment, staging, prod, whatever, but he calls it as tiers here. And he's trying to classify these tiers with respect to the SLAs and SLOs that you define, for these particular environments or tiers, whatever you call it, which is an interesting take. So typically, a testing tier would have no SLAs or SLOs, right? There's no guarantee. It's like an ephemeral environment. Uh, I have a quick question for you guys here. Like, have any of you kind of used throwaway Kubernetes cluster based processes in your workflow anywhere in your company, in your organization, where let's say a developer builds something and you provision a full cluster end to end to test that functionality, and once that testing is done, you destroy the entire cluster. Is that something that any of you have done, and what has been your experience with that?
Hey, we have not yet used any such implementation, but this is something which is kind of under roadmap, and the use case is more towards setting up some sort of test clusters, more like ephemeral clusters. So if we, as you mentioned, right, mainly for testing purpose only, that there
Hmm.
are some use cases where we do not want to disturb any of the production or staging clusters. The developer can eventually get up with those ephemeral clusters. And one way by which I came across this was there's this company called as Humanitech or something. Uh,
Humanect?
Humanitech.
Humanitech. Okay.
Yeah. So these guys are providing some sort of self-serve facilities by and some sort of guidance on how to set up this ephemeral. I'm pretty much not sure about how do they do that, but I also want to know. I'll probably read more about it.
Interesting. We'll check it out, man.
Yep.
So, in my experience, I guess bringing up new clusters has been tedious. A typical EKS would take 10 to 15 minutes to provision the control plane itself, right? And it's much easier to kind of use namespace-based isolation. But anyways, I mean,
I
I'll check this
I
Humanitech
would
thing.
I would recommend just using vCluster. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, folks. This is Carlos with AWS. Um, and I would recommend if it's for ephemeral clusters, I would recommend just using vCluster. Is very
vCluster.
effective, very fast, and the EKS URSA works out of the box. You just need to sync the service accounts, and then it's just like I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes to get a full cluster, and then you delete it. Um, because the
Okay.
EKS cluster control plane that may take
Mm-hmm.
your 10 minutes, and if you have managed
Mm-hmm.
scripts, which you should not be using managed scripts, you should be using Carpenter, then it's another 15 minutes, and you have EBS, there's 5 more minutes. So by
Yeah.
that time, you get bored of waiting for a PR review. So just vCluster. Everybody uses vCluster just for PR testing, including orchestrating that with Argo CD. So when somebody opens a PR, Argo CD installs vClusters, deploy the app in there, test the thing, and then people can request it. When the PR is deleted, PR branch is deleted or merged, then the vCluster goes away.
Interesting. So this would usually run on an EC2 instance, I'm guessing, right?
What do you mean? No, this is vCluster. You install this in a namespace or across it. It
Oh,
uses the
it runs
same.
inside an existing cluster. Okay,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah. That's how
Kubernetes
you do
inside.
vCluster. This is how you do
Uh,
multi-cluster environments.
Interesting.
And then you
Interesting.
have a different control plane. So you install a different. You want to test a different version of Istio or AWS Load
Uh,
Balancing Controller or Cert Manager. You can manage all you want with that Kube API server in that namespace, and then delete it.
yeah, that's
This,
interesting.
this
I'll
is
check
like
this
the
out.
V environment concept.
And the company
Yeah,
Love has it as a SaaS, but this is the open source cluster, open source version behind it.
got it.
Just wanted to say hi, everyone. I cannot make this time because right now, like somebody's asking me for a meeting, but I'm happy for Nimpandra to run this book club session on Thursday. So if you come tomorrow to the Friday session, I'll be there doing KubeBuilder.
Yeah.
So
Thanks,
Thank.
Carlos, for joining in. I'm just traveling, so I think Abdul is taking the lead today.
yep,
So
right,
yeah,
Abdullah. Thank you for driving. Thank you.
Hey man,
Thank you, folks.
thanks for joining, buddy. Nice to see you here.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the ephemeral cluster, right? As at Cloudriga, right? We do trainings, and then for each training we create a cluster on the fly. So whenever somebody starts a lab for our courses, we create a cluster on the fly. And the way we are doing it with the help of KubeVirt. So we have KubeVirt configured, and so every time somebody comes up, we trigger the call with the KubeVirt, create a VM instance, and then on that VM we pass on the cloud init file. In the cloud init file, we have the kubeadm in it.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, pre-build the image with everything in place, and then just
Mm-hmm.
call the cloud init file at the time of start. And that is how we trigger the lab environment on the fly with Kubernetes on the. Of course, a one single node cluster, but it works.
Got it. Got
Uh,
it. But yours is on-prem, right? So it would be much quicker, I guess. It's just a matter of bringing up
Yeah,
a
it's an
VM.
on-prem. It's an on-prem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
so Nipendra, is it something like a K3D clusters that you create on Go, some sort of thing?
No, no, no. We create a complete. So basically, with the KubeVirt, we can spin up a VM, and that VM would have an image which has all the things configured in it, like all the images of Kubernetes given version. And then we have a way to pass the cloud init file. In that, we do a kubeadm init in that particular thing, and spin up the what you call say the ingress, local PV, and all that stuff, right? So we do all that stuff. It takes around 80 seconds to come up.
KubeVirt is not an open source tool, right?
No, it is an open source. It's open. It's just got graduated right now in the CNCF itself, right?
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, it is graduated. So you can create VM on Kubernetes. Yeah.
Thanks, Nipendra.
Cool. So yeah.
Yeah, Asha here. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
just
Sure. Yeah.
so regarding the Kubernetes documentation, if we go, we have kubeadm as a first tool for creating a production-based cluster. Like how is it adopted? Like people go with that, or it's a kind of people use it for the dev and test. Because I use it, but I just wanted to know how it's in general to have any information on using the cluster creating with the kubeadm.
Are you using Kubernetes in production, Asha?
Not in production as such. We test it, but if you go to the Kubernetes documentation production environment, and that's where we have a kind of a creating on-premise using a kubeadm. That's the first option, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we have something around that. But yes, so there are kind of like various securities and other things, all things we need to handle it separately. So but
Mm-hmm.
assume if you have a kind of a private nodes which doesn't have access to the internet, then these kind of thing will be useless, and we just go ahead and have a kubeadm using the kind of a multi api servers, and have a load balancer
Mm-hmm.
for using the API, and then have set up where we have used HCD as a stacked SCD for few we found few issues going with the other approach. So the
Mm-hmm.
stacked SCD, it's the one. So yeah, we have kind of dev setup using kubeadm for production, like not for production, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because it's kind of a first option mentioned in the Kubernetes IO doc. We
Mm-hmm.
pointed to that, but yeah, it's left to the customers how they pick up the creating a production-based cluster.
Got it.
So
I'll tell you
Yeah,
my experience around this. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, sir.
sure.
I'll follow. Yeah. I guess somebody else was speaking. Push, was it
No.
you?
Hello.
Okay, I'll just tell you my experience around these tools. So if I have to give an analogy, right, between Cube ADM versus let's say some managed provider, think of it as if you're out there and you want to buy laptops for your employees, right? Will you buy a MacBook or will you buy a laptop without any OS and use a Linux OS on top of it, right? Typically, you would see that folks go with MacBook, and even I prefer MacBooks because they are more predictable, right? Although I might have slightly lesser control over things, but things are more predictable, especially the updates and upgrades. right? Whenever there is an update, I don't really think twice before applying the upgrade and sit worrying whether my laptop will come up or not. And before I switched to Mac in 2017, I was a pure Linux user, right? And every upgrade, there was no guarantee whether after I run a upgrade on my laptop, whether I'll be able to successfully boot or not. There'll be grub screens and there'll be some driver related issues and stuff like that. So when you try to build things from scratch using hand tools, there is a certain amount of risk involved unless your team and you have enough confidence that you know what you're doing. You should kind of fall back to some leave things to experts, right? And this is a very high level thing. Now giving you a real life example, one of our customers was using kubadm for spinning up their EKS clusters on AWS. Okay. This was an e-commerce backend service provider, and they had a bunch of clusters. They were using Kubadium, and bringing up clusters, creating a new cluster from scratch is absolutely easy and a breeze using these tools, right? But where the problem happens is when you have to upgrade. So they were in a position where they had, I guess, 1.13 or 1.12, I don't exactly remember, that they had provisioned, and the world had moved to like 1.19, right? So there was a difference of around 5 or 6 versions which had come in, and now they had to upgrade. This is where you are not very confident about how these systems will react, especially when you have your control plane, your HCD, everything has to be upgraded.
Yes.
Your worker nodes have to be upgraded. Now, you not many companies would want to be in a position like this, right? Where you don't really have the confidence. Okay, when I have to upgrade, I just go click a button and it is done. So compare it with like EKS experience or Rancher experience, right? You go, you click a button, and it is supposed to be done. And 99 out of 100 times it gets done. And for the remaining one time, you have some support, right? So these are like my 2 cents here. Like others are.
So we have few points there. So one is, of course, QBDM does not provision the environment, and QBDM generic installer. And I think some of these tools would use QBDM behind the scene. Right, so it has not been shown, but they may be using QBDM behind the scene. The other point about that upgrade process, right? Because if somebody is waiting for multi version upgrade like 1.3 to 1.8, whatever, right? So that is something which maybe the company person would have not followed the guideline that you should upgrade whatever time frame, right? Continuously. Because if you wait for over time, the changes are too many. So regular updates are required. And even if you go for EKS, of course they'll have some like long-term support, but they would eventually tell you that okay, after this date we'll not support this. Correct. So I think
True.
regular updates are important, even on-prem or on cloud. Of course, on cloud you pay for that, and so it's all again that whether the engineers or DevOps engineer to do that, or you just want to go with the cloud managed one, yeah, or pay the cloud fee.
Fair point.
Yeah, one challenging like one of the customer wanted to have kind of a hybrid setup where some of their apps will be on the cloud, but some of the apps they don't want to put it on the cloud, the public cloud. They wanted to have their on their kind of own host based, or they want to like kind of not expose it only. Basically not a public cloud. So in that scenario, they were like planning to have the kind of a on-premise Kubernetes system. So any such scenario where the customer is not uh, able to host their application on the public, in such scenario, I think they should go with the on-premise, or is there any such where the customer can have their own hosted and still kind of avail
Yeah, I guess there are some
these
some
managed.
some managed solutions for on-prem as well. Probably I'll share the links in the doc,
Sure.
uh,
Yeah.
right, and you can refer to them. Cool. I guess we just fast track a bit here. Chapter 2 thing. Cluster tiers, node pools. I guess this was already discussed as well. Cluster federation. Again, this is a very advanced level, I would say, discussion, and the author has also kind of briefly covered it here. But just to give a gist, when you are in a position where you have to manage, let's say, more than a handful clusters, right? I would say more than 10 or 15 clusters. Typically, you would want some kind of process or I would say a master cluster which is kind of responsible for handling all of this. And there are special interest groups in Kubernetes as well which kind of are building solutions around this. One of them which was mentioned in this doc is called KubeFed, but that has been deprecated, right? Uh, and there are some challenges around multi-cluster setup, which the author discussed. Like, so how do you manage these clusters? So if you run a management cluster, then is it only responsible for the control plane of your workload clusters, or is it also responsible for your node groups and auto-scaling groups and node pools? So there are two different approaches that have been discussed here. Observability related challenges are also a part of the problem when you have multiple clusters. You would not want, like, 50 different Grafana dashboards or 50 different Grafana installations for 50 different clusters, or again 50 different Prometheuses for those many clusters. You would want a single data source and a single pane of view. So Prometheus also has support for federated metrics ingestion. Moving on to infrastructure part. Okay, there's some discussion around bare metal versus virtualized infra, and here the author has leaned towards virtualization, which is, I guess, the obvious notion. But again, there are some specific needs where you might have to run things on bare metal, right? So, for example, if you're into high frequency trading, or you need some hyper performance sensitive applications where even like milliseconds or microseconds of latencies can impact your business. So you would not want your hypervisor to kind of sit in between and introduce that latency. You would directly want to hit the CPUs or whatever memories of the machines. So in that case, you might still go with bare metals, but typically these days, virtualization is the norm. Okay, moving ahead. I guess these things are pretty self-explanatory. Cool. I guess we just quickly jump to chapter 3 unless there are some specific points or any questions that you guys need to discuss here. Okay, so the chapter 3 in this book is pretty interesting, and it's around the container runtime. There are a bunch of things that I personally learned a lot, got to know from this particular chapter in particular. And see, Kubernetes, typically we hear it as a Kubernetes container orchestrator platform, but it does not directly deal with containers anymore. In the early days, I guess Kubelet and the Kubernetes control plane was kind of integrated with the Docker daemon running on your machine, and I guess Docker was the only container runtime which was supported. But since version 1.24 or 1.25, they have kind of abstracted this out, and it's no longer dependent on Docker, and it supports multiple runtimes for your containers, right? So when you think about containers, and containers are not, there's nothing called as a container. There's nothing special about a container. It's just a process which is guarded by namespaces and C groups, right? Which are like core Linux kernel level concepts. And what Docker did was it made these kind of processes which are bound by C groups and namespaces and have some kind of isolation. Docker made these processes kind of mainstream, and it made it easier for developers to kind of work with these sandbox processes, right? And most of the terminologies that we use, I guess, are or have been provided by Docker. So containers, Docker images, typically it would be a container image, but we call it a Docker image. It's a normal container, but we call it a Docker container, right? It was one of the pioneers in this field, but as everything in open source, there are alternatives that keep on coming in, right?
Hey
So
guys, can you hear me?
yes,
Yes,
Niranjan.
yeah.
Yeah, I could hear you throughout, but I think in between something happened. I could not speak. I believe before we, Abdul, just sorry to kind of interrupt in between, but I think there are some important points which are in the second chapter,
Mm-hmm.
which I think if we can quickly talk about them, that would be really good.
Sure, sure. Tell me.
Sure. So one of the point was there that the cluster APIs, right? So let me just try to get that particular page there. Config management. The cluster API part was in this particular chapter only, right?
I remember reading it.
Yeah. So if we go to the machine installer, I'm just trying to get that page. Sorry, I'm just traveling right now, so I'm not there. Um, yeah, I think on the page number 34, right? 33 and 34,
Okay.
right? So they're talking about cluster APIs, and that is something very significant part of in the
Yeah.
production these days, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what I understood from this particular part is that uh, first of all, we would need to create these clusters on demand as they come up, as the requirement comes up. And then, for example, if you look at that figure number 2.1, right? Yeah, can you go up? Yeah.
Yeah,
There
please.
we can see that, right? So we need to, when you have to kind of create more cluster, for example, there is a management cluster which can create more clusters for you. So I'm not sure that how many of you have used this what called Gardener, or I think VMware have something also built on top of it as well now, right? And even the vCluster thing what talked about by Carlos, right? So what
Mm-hmm.
companies need is they want to create these clusters on demand as the requirement comes, and then they would want to add more nodes also on the fly, right? As there is a requirement maybe. So what I think figure 2.1 is saying that, right? You have an infra cluster, and then management. Sorry, there's a cluster of management cluster is there that can talk to you, to your provider of, let's say, a cloud provider and so on, and create these workload clusters. Now let's say if you have to automatically again scale the cluster. Now there are two options to us, which is given in 2.1 here, the 2.1 diagram there, right? That it can talk back to the management cluster to request for auto scaling, correct? But that may not be something which would be uh, efficient, and maybe because of what do you call, say, the network latency and so on, it will not be possible. So if you look at in the figure 2.2 next slide, next particular highlight, they are saying that we are going to put this auto scaler capability or the cluster API capability, right, within the workload cluster as well. So think about you have you are creating today cluster, and maybe for given microservice only, right? And that microservice require more scalability, correct? So we are first of all creating these clusters via the management clusters, and then we are empowering the workload cluster also to scale by itself when the need comes up. So rather than going back to the management cluster every time, these clusters can be scaled by itself. Is the point clear, or am I able to convey my message or not?
Yes, I had a specific question around this, Nipendra, since
Hmm.
you have explained this. So this second, the figure 2.2 part, right,
Hmm.
where the cluster API is now split between management cluster and workload cluster.
Correct.
Uh, Ideally, so this cluster API running in the workload cluster, does it work as a client and this management cluster works as a server? Is it a server client mode, or these two cluster APIs are like totally independent of each other?
That's the whole point, right? Whole point. So maybe
Yeah, Nipendra can't hear you properly.
the
Yeah, his voice is breaking. Yeah, Nipendra, can't hear you.
Yeah, I guess we
Hello,
lost you, man.
hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if he'll probably scroll down, he'll realize maybe he's not there.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he can hear us.
Carry on.
Mm,
Cool.
he joined back.
Can you hear me? I'm here always. I can hear you all the
Yeah,
time.
you're back. You're back. You're back. Continue,
You're
sir.
back. Oh, so I'm in the
Let's finish
train.
that. Yeah.
I'm in the train right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. So what I understood from that, it's going to be the cluster API is part of the workload cluster also. It will work out. That
Mm-hmm.
is what it's possible now. That is what I can understood from this particular part of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
No, the reason why I
and
asked this question
then
was in my head. If you are going in a model where there's a management cluster, and that cluster
Mhm,
is responsible for all your infrastructure needs, basically, right? That is a go-to
mhm.
guy. Then now, if you go ahead and split it like this, you have two different places to go and ask for things, right? So I was not really sure whether these two are like totally standalone, or is the cluster API running in workload somehow also talking to management cluster, getting some metadata, whatever, and as a ops team or as a platforms team, I am only supposed to configure the management cluster, and all the other stuff is kind of taken care of by this management cluster, including the cluster API agent, which should go along with the workload cluster. So I guess that's where I was coming from.
I think maybe we can put up some kind of limitation there, or at least some kind of basically again that's where the observability layer would come and all that stuff, right? That how many
Let me
it,
put it this way. Okay, let me put
uh,
it this way. If I want to create a new workload cluster,
uh,
the management cluster does it for me, right? I go
yes,
to
correct,
management cluster.
yes, yes, yes.
If I
And
have
auto
to
scale,
create, if I have to create a cluster API, now this cluster API is going to be some kind of a controller running in this cluster, right? Do I have to do a Helm install or a installation outside of this, or again I have to go to management cluster and say,
no,
make sure
no,
cluster API is available for me?
no, it can do itself. So if I hear about this, there's something called as Gardener from SAP,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they have this concept of seeding kind of a thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one can start another and so on. So you can basically so workload cluster can again create more cluster as well. So
Mm-hmm.
if there is a need, but this is how it is. This is all the requirement of the industry also, because you want to autonomous team, and
Mm-hmm.
then there will be some way of getting data back, which tells you how many clusters you have running and everything. But this is a real need in the environment. What I have understood.
Mm-hmm.
So
Got
I
it.
can get more clarity on this, but this is what I am. This is what my understanding is at this point of time.
Got it. Yeah, I'll check this Gartner out as well. Maybe I'll also try to dig deep into the cluster API and how usually like people are using it.
Correct, correct. Yeah. And this was one more point.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, Sora cluster has following benefits: control plane, networking, redundancy. Uh, yeah, this point about Kubernetes operators. I think all of you would be aware of that, right? What is the operators, right? Or is it not sure? So, yeah. Anybody else has seen that about the config management tool, right? Earlier, there used to be Ansible, Chef, Puppet, and so on. Now they got down, right, with Kubernetes and other things. So, has anybody seen those particular management tools getting phased out in companies, or they're still news?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them phase out.
Mhm.
I guess for companies who are totally
Okay,
on cloud,
okay.
these tools have become kind of redundant if they are like totally on cloud and Kubernetes. But if you have workloads outside of Kubernetes, people are still kind of using it. So I know one company who's using it to run their MongoDB cluster on EC2. So Yeah, I mean they kind of use Ansible plus Terraform to kind of manage that stack separately.
Okay, okay, fine. And then can we come down to the, I think, to, uh, I think there's an in chapter number, page number 55, page 55. There, they're mentioning about the strategies to upgrade the cluster, right?
Yeah.
Right. So there, they have given few different options to do the upgrade there. One
Hmm.
of I found very interesting is the cluster replacement, right?
Hmm.
So it means if I come down to the next page, there you can see on the page number 57, there is a diagram given, right? Which
Yeah.
is about the GSL, the kind of copying the content from one cluster to another cluster. Right? So as you can see here, there is cluster V1, cluster V2, and if we were to migrate all the thing from V1 to V2, right? Right? And there's Velero. So Velero is a backup which we can take the backups on Kubernetes of it. So my first question is that anybody use Velero in production within the people who are in the call today?
I have not used, but
Mm-hmm.
in my company, I remember someone proposing Valero for backup restore as part of a real client opportunity.
Okay.
I don't know if that opportunity materialized or not, but if I remember correctly, I think one of the clients was using Valero. That's all I know.
Okay.
You should adopt Velero, man. I guess again one of our customers they accidentally deleted a namespace and there is no control Z, so things are pretty bad.
Hmm.
You should definitely have a backup strategy in place when you're dealing with Kubernetes.
So this can do two parts. What I see here is one is of course doing a regular backup, like you just take the backup at a regular interval, and then the what they're using here is for basically like a take a snapshot at one end and restore it at the other place, right? So base you basically let's you migrate to different cloud altogether, right? There we can use this. So Velero is something that is going to be used, yeah, and then the second one was placement strategy. Basically, of course, you um, take the nodes and then we replace the node one by one and then uh, do do the do the there, right? So, any idea how does EKS is doing behind the scene, the cluster upgrades, EKS or any other cloud provider?
Not really sure of the internals, but I guess I remember reading that it does a blue-green for your control plane at least. And
Okay.
regarding worker nodes, I mean,
Hmm.
it depends whether you are using managed worker nodes or self-managed worker nodes. So if you are using
Hmm.
EKS managed worker nodes, it's a standard algorithm, right? You create a new node group, or let's say you create a new set of instances. You flag the old instances as unschedulable, and you drain them one by one. And once the training is complete, it kind of then deletes the old node group, right? Old set of nodes in that particular node group.
Okay.
So let's say if you
Let me
have
ask.
five nodes in your node group, it will create five more nodes. There'll be 10 nodes in your node group. It
Mm-hmm.
will mark the old five as unschedulable and start draining them one by one. Eventually,
Okay.
you will have five new nodes with the latest version.
Okay. Right. Right. Anybody has done production upgrades Like anybody has in this call has did a real production upgrade manually? No one? Okay.
Sorry, not.
I have done for 3 node cluster I have done production going on and upgraded there. So that's the otherwise there is this will be part, right? Which is
In Nipendra, you become Optimus Prime.
Yeah, exactly.
Buddy, we lost you again.
I'll
We need some sort of high availability solution.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
Nipendra. Yeah. I think it will be far easier to fix railways.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
he's
guess
saying.
5G should fix it. But
Well, they said the same thing when 4G and 3G came.
that's
Let's
true,
hope.
man. That's true. That's true. Cool. So anything else around upgrades? Any questions? Any discussions that folks might be interested in, or probably we can
Actually,
move on.
this, I mean, I know you brought up that container runtime topic for a short moment.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually trying to ask, before Nipendra came in, like, do we have some kind of a comparison or a, when to use which runtime now that the whole runtime thing is like a plug-in concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and there are so many different runtimes available, Docker and then Cryo and then I think RKT, if I'm not wrong, and there could be more.
Mm-hmm.
I am a little out
Mm-hmm.
of touch with that. But then,
Mm-hmm.
is there some kind of is there an article or link available which kind of helps in the guiding when to use which container runtime, or what are the advantages or disadvantages, kind of?
I think you'll find enough material online, but if you have not read this chapter 3, I would strongly recommend that you just at least read this third chapter from this book. I mean, it was really insightful for me, and it tries to answer the question that you have asked. Now,
Okay.
this book is slightly outdated, so I would say after you do this, maybe also go online. But this
Hmm.
kind of sets the base for you, right? And tries to answer this question that which runtime should you choose. And the
Okay.
author in this book has taken very simple approach here, right? And I agree with the author because it's a very specific and a very niche discussion that you're having here when you say which runtime to choose. Because end of the day, in most of the cases, it doesn't really matter, right?
Hmm.
The first question that the author asks here is that what is your team comfortable with, right? If you're choosing a runtime, what is that runtime that your team is comfortable with? And most of the people are comfortable with Docker, right?
That's where my question starts, right? I mean, for example, when I, let's say I'm using Kubernetes or, for example, OpenShift, when I deploy a pod, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
hardly care what runtime is there, right? I mean, when I
Mm-hmm.
deploy a pod, the pod gets deployed, application is
Mm-hmm.
running, everything working fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why do you even bother about these different runtimes? That's the basic question I had. In the sense, like, why do we even have this capability of choosing across different runtimes, right? Why even do that?
Right. So I guess the reason why runtimes came into picture was, like I was briefly talking about, right? That Kubernetes earlier was kind of hard-coded in a way, the kubelet part, which deals with creating pods, and that information or that logic around how to create a container, how to create a pod, run containers inside that pod, right? It was hard-coded in your kubelet, right? And if you wanted to support, let's say, a new runtime, so like you mentioned, I guess OpenShift. So OpenShift, if I'm not wrong, uses Cryo,
Yeah,
right? CRIO, however you call it, I don't know. It's
yeah,
called Cryo, right? So
yeah.
that again is an implementation of the Kubernetes runtime interface, right? and it's a plugin that works. It's built purely for this purpose. Docker was not purely built for Kubernetes, right?
Yes.
Docker containerd again was not built for Kubernetes purpose. It was a more generic, container based tool set, you can say, right? A tool chain which allowed you to do things around containers. uh, Now with Kubernetes and now with this runtime thing, tools like Cryo have come up which are specifically built for that, right? So that is one major difference. And the first, before that, we were talking about uh, Docker functionality being hard coded in kubelet, which meant that if you wanted to add, let's say, a support for Cryo, you had to release a new version of Kubernetes.
Yeah. That's the advantage of having the plugin interface, right? So that I
Right,
understand.
right.
That I understand. Okay, let me put it my question the other way. Like, what kind of business level um, features or business level functions I may or may not be able to do if I
Mm-hmm.
choose Cryo versus Docker or RKT? I mean, how does it affect the business workflow? Is what my question is. Eventually, that's what is going to. I mean, okay, one developer might be more comfortable with RKT or one might be more comfortable with Cryo. Okay, but who cares? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
eventually, you're deploying Kubernetes for a business function.
Got it. I mean, honestly, I don't think
Can
I'm
you hear me,
qualified to
guys?
answer that question. Maybe, yeah, Nipendra is here.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nipendra.
Yeah, so the question is there. The idea simple is that see, Docker has more lines of code, right? So if something goes wrong, it's difficult, right? That's one, and it has more functionality than what we needed. So I think it's all than business. It's all about, I mean, which is more stable and which is more uh, generic or which is more built for this purpose only, right? That
Yeah.
I
okay,
guess
what my need is
question
just
is
want
not
to.
question is not Docker versus non Docker. I guess question here is, let's say, out of all the options that are available today, how do you choose one? Now, assume Docker is not there. Out of container D, Cryo, or Rocket
Hmm.
or whatever, something else that comes up. How do you make that choice? Is there any business implication? Are there any specific purpose that these runtimes solve that other doesn't? Right? I guess that is a question, right? That you
Yeah.
asked.
Yeah.
So I
At the
think it
business
is.
logic level. Yeah.
No, it is. I don't think so. So it's only between the cryo and the container D. That's it, right? Otherwise, nothing is there.
I heard something like RKT, right? It used to be there. I don't know if it is still relevant or not.
I think RKT would be a container runtime rather than a CRI. Uh,
Dominance
CRI
of
is container runtime itself.
CRI is an interface, right? CRI basically is a piece of tool that enables your kubelet to talk to your runtime, right? It basically allows your kubelet to create, update, delete, whatever, do CRUD on
Yeah,
your
it
container
provides the
on the
API
machine.
basically, right? But then behind
Right.
the
So,
API is what who implements the API. The RKT or the Cryo will implement that API, right?
uh-huh.
So eventually, Cryo, RKT, Docker, I see them as peers. Maybe if you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Hmm, probably I'll have to recheck on this, but I guess RKT comes at a lower level. It would come, let's say, after Cryo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So is it deprecated? RKT, I remember Rocket was deprecated sometimes back. So the project ended and was
Oh, is
because of,
it?
yeah, I
Okay,
think
then
long
yes.
back yeah, RKT was, yeah, no,
Okay. Project ended. Yeah.
yeah. It was something similar to Docker, but I think
Mhm.
because of less adoption, it was being yeah, ended.
Mm.
Okay. So we don't have much choices anyways then.
Okay, so you don't have to worry about it, buddy. Your problem solved.
Yeah. But then yeah, the whole concept of making it a pluggable interface, which basically means that
Mhm.
tomorrow somebody can come with a newer one as well, right? So that's when the
Right.
question could pop up again, when to choose what. But then maybe not relevant in today context.
Yeah, that's true. So like I was saying, right, the author says first question that you ask is what experience your team has, with which tool. And the second question is again one of the important questions is that depending on the platform that you're using, right? So whether you're using OpenShift or you're using EKS or AKE or whatever, uh, is there support available for that CRI plugin that you're choosing, right? Since these are plug and play, you might go ahead and say, I want to use OpenShift, but I want to use Containerd and not Cryo. But if Red Hat says we won't support that, so the
Yeah,
author kind
that
of
definitely
discourages that
out of question.
don't do things like these. So I
Yeah.
guess these are the kind of considerations that you have, and I guess like Nipendra said, that you don't have much options. I mean, just two right now, right? And they're like these are like tools which do very specific tasks for you. So yep. Guys, I guess we are out of time already. It's 9:01. Maybe we should wrap it up for today
Yep.
and continue this in the next session. But today's session was pretty interesting, guys. I mean, really interesting questions coming in, and I was planning to cover chapter 3, but I guess that's not an issue as long as we kind of collectively have a good time here, and I had a good time.
Yep. Yep. Same here. Thanks for leading the session,
Yes.
Abdul.
Uh,
Cool.
hey,
Uh,
just
yeah.
wanted to know one thing. If
Mm-hmm.
can take a minute or so.
Array, sure. I guess for Q&A we can stay long. I mean, people
Uh,
can stay who want
no,
to.
like I didn't had a
Yeah.
question regarding this, like the topic at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to know about the sessions that you guys conduct. Usually, like
Mm-hmm.
how do you guys approach to it? What's the usual format? Like this was my first time, and I want to continue. It was like really fun. Got to know a lot of things. So if some,
Thanks for the question. Yeah, thanks for the question, man, Kush. This is the second session that we are having, anyways, right? So it's not something that we are doing for a long time. The initial idea started from the original Kubernetes book club, which is run by Carlos. I guess Carlos had joined earlier in the call for a while. Uh, the issue that we had with that was like it happens on Friday around 11:30 or 10:30 p.m. Indian time. So it's focused for US time zone, right? Since he is living there. So Nipendra kind of took this initiative, and he started a separate book club for India time zone, right, or rather Asian time zone, and hence this book club has started. There is no particular format or there's no particular rules we have set down yet for this, right? So in the very first meeting, what we did was we went through a list of books and collectively decided that we'll start with production Kubernetes because it's kind of generic and it's not very topic specific, so that it might be friendly for beginners, and anybody can just jump in and kind of start from wherever we are. There are other very interesting books. So I guess in the US book club, they are currently reading Cube Builder,
yeah,
right, which is a specific, I would say, topic specific book. But we started with production Kubernetes. We are just maintaining a document. I've shared in the chat here. You might have seen. So we just try to log, capture whatever links that get shared, and try to just set the agenda for the next meetup that we have. So yeah, that's an overview. And my particular, I would say, reason to get involved in this is that I'm a very lazy reader. I don't remember reading any book end to end, cover to cover, a technical book cover to cover in my life, right? And I've spent a good part of my life. So I thought this is going to be a good motivation for me to get into this reading thing, and it has helped, right? So yeah, everybody has their own reasons, I guess. So why are you here, Kush?
uh, so right now I'm working as a platform engineer, uh,
Nice.
and Kubernetes has been something I've been working since last 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the times it's more like hands-on, right? We usually do not go in depth of what exactly how the technology works, and that is
Mm-hmm.
something that I wanted to get into and understand eventually how the technology works on the underlying basis. And even I got to know about the CNCF Slack channel, and book club. Oh, nice. So basically, book club fund is something that we also follow within our company,
Nice.
and every week.
What
So
companies do you work for, buddy?
is it fine? Like, where does this recording goes? Just,
Is it doing recording? Acha, it's being recorded. Okay, it's fine, dude. No
can we
worries.
stop it, probably?
I don't have access. Nipendra has access. Signing off, guys. See you next week. It's okay. It's fine. You can skip that question. Not an
I'll
issue.
reach out to you on Slack, probably.
Sure thing. Cool, man. Nice to see you here. Anybody else wants to discuss about anything?
What are the plans for the next week? Are we taking up next chapter?
Yeah, we'll try to finish off chapter 3 and chapter 4. That's what I'm thinking here. So in the first call we decided that we'll do chapter 1 to chapter 3, right? In the next book reading call, but we were able to just finish one first chapter and half of second chapter. Today also, I guess most of the call went in the second chapter, and we just barely started the third one. In the next call, I think we'll plan for chapter 3 and chapter 4, but let's see. I mean, like I said, as long as we are having interesting discussions, I don't mind spending an hour a week. Yeah, it's fine.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, even it's a good sign actually, because
Yeah.
if you're able to complete 3 chapters in an hour, probably either people are not getting engaged or we're just missing out something.
Yeah. No, the engagement is better. Yeah, engagement is better.
Yep.
But we'll also get some idea about how to pace these things, right? I mean, like I said, it's just the beginning for us. So, yep.
Awesome.
In my case also, like Abdul said, I am also a lazy person. So I thought instead of me reading the book, it's better somebody else reads the book and tells me. That is the reason I'm here. But yeah, I don't
Nice.
have much experience with Kubernetes because I am more on the OpenShift side, and in that OpenShift also I'm more on the DevOps side of OpenShift. Like and uh, I like, for example, I don't know much details on the OpenShift, let's say security side or networking side, but DevOps side I have quite a few tutorials and tutorials and all published on the IBM developer uh, portal.
Nice. So you work on the OpenShift, the open source side of things, or the enterprise offering that they have? I guess there are two different flavors, right, for OpenShift?
Yeah. So answer is neither. I don't work on the OpenShift with core technology. I am
Mm-hmm.
more on the, well, I used to be a pre-sales consultant before, and before
Mm-hmm.
that I used to be a hands-on developer.
Mm-hmm.
I've contributed to, if you remember, the OpenStack project in the past,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but then those were the old days of my career. In current role, I am more of a, skills enablement and a technology enablement kind of a role, where I work for creating technology related courses for my company's sellers and business partners and all. So that is where I use a lot of OpenShift to create hands-on labs, demos, and stuff like that to enable other people, basically.
Got it. So this comes under the DevRel thing that is happening these days, right? If I'm not wrong.
I don't know. I'm not used or heard that in my company, at least.
Okay.
Looks
Cool,
like
man.
DevRel, or what you say, developer advocate or something.
Oh, you mean developer relations?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
yes,
It used to be
yes.
called as developer advocacy in the past, but you are right. I
Mm-hmm.
consider myself kind of an advocate for OpenShift inside my org. I kind of stretch to do that work
Mm-hmm.
because I believe in, of course, there are a lot of material, lot of tutorials, around OpenShift, and if you just Google, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then a lot of those stuff I see is pretty complex for a beginner to understand,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that stuff just blindly use CLIs.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my tutorials, I strive to see if I can do everything using the GUI, using the OpenShift console.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easier for people who are new, or who are not coming from a developer, or who are not coming from a hardcore Linux background.
Mm-hmm.
For them also, how can I make it easy to make them understand the complex OpenShift concepts in a simpler way? So that's what I strive for.
Got it. Interesting, man. Uh, I guess it's time to wrap up and
Yeah.
see you guys next week.
So
Bye.
Chalo, bye
Have a
guys.
good weekend.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.